So my name is Kevin Killen. We're sitting here in the big room at Peter Gabriel's world-famous Real World Studios in Box, UK. The reason we're here is because this is such a unique recording space, but also what we're trying to achieve, what the drum sample library is supposed to be about. And I think our initial discussions led to the idea that we're going to make big, open drum sounds, resonant drum sounds. And I felt like this space, even though it's a quote unquote a control room, has a really wonderful tone to it, just very natural decay. And if you look around, you'll see a lot of concrete and a lot of glass, and you would think, oh, maybe that would naturally lend itself to warm tones. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. There's a brightness to the sound, but there's also a richness to the sound. And that's also evident in the wood room, which is the secondary space that we recorded in. So we did the first 3 kits in this big room, the second 3 kits in the main space in the wood room, and then we've added some extra kits in the small ISO booth, just to give a broader degree of choices. Each space is unique, and each space has a characteristic to it that I think lends itself to any kind of genre of music. Had never any intention of being a working musician, just liked it for the love of music. I wanted to be an engineer, like a mechanical engineer or something in that field. I'd seen a documentary about the making of an XTC record that was done with Hugh Padgham and Steve Lillywhite producing. And I thought, oh, that looks like a really interesting career. It combines all the things that I'm interested in. And so I literally pulled out the Yellow Pages phone book and I looked up recording studios. And eventually one of them said, yeah, we have an intern program, come back for an interview. I went in for my interview with the studio manager. My dad gave me this white jacket, like a rain jacket, but it was kind of cut at the waist. And I went in and Pat said, oh, where'd you get that jacket? And I was like, oh, it's my dad's. He goes, oh, you got good taste. Okay, you're hired. Where's my baby monitor?
Ooh.
Baby's gone.
It's not on input.
So literally like the following week, right before the end of the term, I went into the studio. And I remember distinctly walking in, you had to step up to where the console was. So I remember stepping up on that console and seeing the Helios console and thinking, this is like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Like it just was totally enamored by this whole thing. And from there, I basically trained as an apprentice for the next 6 years, 2 years at that studio. And then I got hired to the premier studio in Dublin called Windmill Lane, where U2 and Van Morrison and Sinead O'Connor did the majority of their early work. The first big project, as an engineer, was U2's War album, which was their 3rd studio album. So I was the assistant engineer on that. Ironically enough, the producer was Steve Lillywhite, the person that, was part inspiration for my, venture into the recording environment. And so Steve came to Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin. I got to do a little bit of engineering on that record. And then on their next studio, which is The Unforgettable Fire, and they approached Brian Eno about actually being the producer of record on that particular project, and I ended up going up there and working with Dan and Brian. So that was the record that I probably was my first feather in my engineering cap, so to speak.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
When Real World was founded, there was this philosophy about creating these kind of environments. Nothing had been built like this before. There had been recording spaces that were as big as this, but they're more designed for orchestral work. But to build a control room this size where you could probably have, upwards of 25 musicians all playing without headphones simultaneously, and they can all hear themselves balanced in the room. And so when this particular studio or space was found, his idea and his vision was to build this big room. The studio opened up in 1987, and I have come back here almost every other year to record a project or work on some project here, and it is just the most creative space that I've worked at worldwide. It's just the most incredible working space. When I was approached by Toontrack and we started that discussion about where to record a drum sample library, I asked if they would be interested in recording at Real World, and they said absolutely. We recorded both simultaneously to tape and to Pro Tools, and because we wanted to hear the difference between both. And it's kind of amazing, as much as people really don't understand the value of tape, it still has such a wonderful characteristic, and we felt like there's certain aspects of the drum recording coming back off the tape machine that are just so unique to tape. The way in which the bottom end resonates, the way you get that extra harmonic coloration coming back off tape. You hear it on the kick drum, you hear it on the floor toms, you certainly hear it a little bit on the deeper snares. As a recordist, you're always trying to overcome the inherent noise floor that's just inherent in any audio path. So you're trying to get the system to work at its nominal operating level, which means the most transparent sound, the least amount of noise. I hit the tape, for the loudest hits that Norman was hitting on the drum set. We were certainly getting up there almost to full scale, but that gave us a little bit of tape compression. That gave us a little extra kind of boom in the bottom. And so I think you'll hear that certainly on the kick drum, and you'll certainly hear that on the floor toms, just a little extra resonance for free. You just get it for free. And so it's kind of like having EQ without having to engage EQ. So we made a decision that we could record parallel, and it's easy to do here at Real World. It was relatively easy to do, to run a parallel. And so we can hear A/B, the difference between the same input coming back off tape and then just straight into tools. And the difference is pretty remarkable. It's definitely colored, and I think that's the reason why the library is going to sound so amazing. We wanted to have kits that had both a combination of a modern sound and also stuff that would have a certain vintage feel to it. Certainly I wanted things that had a lot of resonance and that would basically come alive in a room like this. So we weren't really going for tight drum sounds. We were going for big open sounds that could be used in multiple genres. So the first kit was a modern acrylic kit. For me, it felt like a really good rock sound. And then we supplemented that with some rototoms, which are something you don't normally find, but we felt like it would fit in with the spirit of that kit. The drums are up on the riser, so directly behind where the engineer would sit. And the versatility that gave us was to place additional room mics all over the room. So the close mics are clearly going to pick up the proximity of sound that's been generated from each hit. But the room mics, you get this wonderful decay going on. It's not super long. It's probably somewhere between, I would say 1.5 seconds, maybe up to 2 seconds. And it's not like super reverberant, but it gives you a sense of size and scale. And when you look at the room, we've got 40 or 50 foot ceilings here. And to be able to get that on a drum sound, it's pretty spectacular. So then the Silver Sparkle kit that we used was a slightly scaled down version of that, but we introduced some concert toms on it, to give it a little, yet again, to give it a slightly different tone, different skins, slightly more old world a little bit, but still kind of big and definitely has a presence, a strong presence. And then the last kit we did in this room was the Green Sparkle kit, which I think for all of us in the room was all of our favorites. I mean, we don't want to say you have favorites just like children, but there's something about that character of that kit that's very special. And I think that when the users put it up, they'll realize why. The wood room is a really special sounding room. Ironically, they named it the wood room, but actually when you walk in, there's a lot of stone in the room. So when one hears the name, one thinks, oh, it's going to be a big warm sound. And in fact, it does actually have that characteristic and that personality, but also it has a very distinct brightness to it, which it doesn't sound brash, it just sounds bright. And so it gives those drums in that space a kind of sense of added attack, and it makes the drums feel like they really pop in that space. But we also use the room mics to actually capture the room tone. So all that sparkle, all that brightness is represented on those microphones. Just hit kick snare. So the first kit we decided to work with there was the purple kit. And that is typically used by Manu Katché. I thought since we're at Real World and Manu has such a strong association with Peter, it would be good to get the sound of that kit. We introduced some octobans in that to give it to give it a slightly different flavor. It's owned by Peter, obviously used by Manu Katché every time he comes here, and we feel honored to have that in this library. So the second kit we chose to use was a little bit of an unusual kit. We call it the Bumblebee kit. It's a very distinctive look. It has concert toms on it, which we didn't have in any of the other kits. And we thought, this could be a really interesting sound. It's either going to work really well or it's going to be terrible. But Mark is such a fantastic drum tech that as soon as he put it up and worked on it for a couple of minutes, the thing just resonated in the room. And it gives us a slightly different timbre in that space. So then we moved into the booth, the wood booth, which is incorporated in the main wood room, but it has a sliding glass partition and it has obviously a lower ceiling, and that makes the general impact of the drums be a little tighter and more in your face. But obviously it has glass and it has concrete, so there is a little bit of that reflective slap as well in the space. For drum libraries, or even just drum recordings in general, you want to have a variety of sounds. And not every drum kit is going to work in every genre or in every song. So when you have slightly more unusual timbral responses, you can actually manipulate them in different ways. And they can create an unusual environment and an unusual foundation from which to build a production. So we started at, the first kit we put in there is this vintage full dress 1930s kit. You can see it's fantastic looking. It's just gorgeous looking kit. So it has calfskins on it, which yet again is a very different timbral response to any of the other heads we've had on any of the other kits. And when Damien from Toontrack found it online and he said, how about this? I was like, we got to record a kit like that. Last night, Damien from Toontrack actually auditioned the first draft of 3 of the kits through the software, and then we just plugged it in through the console to hear it. And he hit play, and literally I just couldn't believe how great it sounded, because during the process of recording, we're only hearing one hit at a time.
I don't think we've got any MIDI with that, unfortunately. So,
Did you not do room time MIDI?
Yeah, I will. I will have to.
It's funny because, when you were playing in the room, it sounded great, and we captured a piece that sounded great, but then all you then hear is just individual hits. So then to hear it come back, and it feels like you're in the room playing it.
yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, yes,
no, it's really...
Yeah, very happy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we haven't been wasting our time. It has a humanity to it. It has musicality to it. It has all the things you look for in a great drum sound. but it's coming off, a piece of software. I'm really astonished because I've recorded drums for 44 years and to hear something like that. And the majority of it is unprocessed. I made a conscious decision not to do a lot of processing on the kit. So pretty much everything is straight wire into either the tape deck or into Pro Tools. So no EQ, no compression. I think we've used just 2 pieces of outboard gear for 2 particular microphones just to give them a little bit of flavor. So what you're hearing is really what was going on in the room. So choosing the right microphones with the right kind of frequency response, and then hearing that balance coming out of the software. It's fantastic. What's really been eye-opening about this whole 2-week experience is, if I take it back to the beginning of my career as a recordist, at the start of every project, we always focused on drums. Drums were the initial focus for every record we ever made. And you would often spend the first day just setting up the drums and getting a drum sound. And as the record industry has changed and technology has changed over the years, people seem to pay less attention to drums. And not that I don't think that they don't think it's important. It's just that, budgets have changed, processes changed. So to actually have the ability to spend 2 weeks recording drums, nothing but drums, and just focusing on drums for 12 hours a day, just took me back to why I loved recording in the first place. That mystique about how you put an instrument up, put a microphone in front of it, set the gain staging, have the player hit the instrument in the right way, brings back my love of drums. And the thing about it is, the older you get in this industry, you realize you have to continually keep yourself open to learning. And the one thing I've learned this last couple of weeks is there's always new emerging technologies. You can't be afraid of technology. You have to embrace them. I can't imagine now going into a session without using this as I move forward. And I think as a creative tool for making records, the idea that you could be sitting anywhere in the world and you could access the sound of the big room or the sound of the wood room where so many wonderful records have come out, it's just mind-boggling. I think it's an amazing experience. I've loved every minute of it.